He says, let's see what he's going to do. I can hear you. You're only just right over there. Jeez. Well. So guys, we are in Judges chapter 8. And I kind of want to preface this study with, just because it's in the Bible doesn't mean that it's like a recommended thing or that it was a good thing or that even God was in it. And, we see all sorts of examples of, guys who have been called to a certain thing that go and they accomplish that thing. And then they kind of go out on their own and do other stuff. And you're like, what in the world happened to you? We see that as we were studying the book of Kings, 1st and 2nd Kings. And, when we get into chapter 8, it's kind of like that. We're going to see the life of Gideon here after the battle that he won. And so towards the end, Gideon gets a little off the rails, I think. So just kind of to review a little bit, chapter 7, was the battle, the 300 men of Gideon versus the 135,000 Midianites. The cool thing about that is up until, at that point, God was directing Gideon's life. He was just proving himself over and over again to Gideon. And after you see God direct Gideon to go down to the camp to hear, what the soldiers are thinking, what they're talking about, Gideon leaves there. He worships, he rejoices over there, and then he sets up his army, his 300-man army, to surround the Midianites, and they have the whole plan of breaking the pitchers, throwing the torches in the air and blowing the horns and freaking everybody out down in the camp so that they start wiping each other out. And from that point on, from everything from there, you don't actually see Gideon talk to the Lord again. So everything that follows that event, it could be that it's just the way that it's written, and that he really did seek the Lord on these things, but it's not really spoken about. So, it kind of makes the Gideons kind of slide into a more like he's trusting in his own wisdom and his own strength. It makes a little bit more sense that he's no longer going before the Lord praying about things. So, just to review here, when we last saw Gideon, he was with his men watching the army of the Midianites retreat towards the Jordan River. And most of them, had killed each other in the confusion. Gideon called in the reinforcements to basically chase these guys down. And he called upon a tribe that he had not invited at first into the battle. And that was the tribe of Ephraim. And that is kind of significant because you remember what tribe Gideon is from? Anybody remember? From the tribe of Manasseh, okay? And so how are the tribes of Manasseh and Ephraim tied to each other? You remember? So these are the sons of Joseph. So these are tribes, but they are actually when Joseph or when Jacob was handing out blessings, he basically gave Ephraim and Manasseh, Joseph's son, each a blessing. And in that blessing, he blessed one tribe over the other. And it's supposed to be the older tribe that was supposed to get the blessing. But remember, in the story, we'll actually read it here in just a minute. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. So Genesis 48, 3 through 5, this tells the story. It says, Then Jacob said to Joseph, God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me and said to me, Behold, I will make you fruitful and multiply you, and I will make you a multitude of people and give you this land for your descendants after you as an everlasting possession. And now your two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you in Egypt, are mine. As Reuben and Simeon, they shall be mine. So, basically, what you see there is Jacob adopting his grandsons so that he can give them blessings. Is it this thing crackling? All right. Crack-a-lacking? Or is it lacking some crackling? Not lacking. Anyway, so you remember back, the tradition is the blessing always goes to the firstborn. Jacob and Esau, Jacob tricked Isaac into giving him the firstborn's blessing over his brother Esau, and so he got a double blessing. And Joseph basically, does exactly the same thing with these two boys, with Ephraim and Manasseh. So these two tribes, just so you know that Manasseh was the older and Ephraim is the younger and got the blessing. So these tribes basically came from brothers, where all the other tribes came from their uncles. So it's a little bit different setup. So Manasseh was the oldest, and Ephraim was the one that got the greater blessing. We see that in Genesis 48, 17 through 20. It says, "Now when Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand on the head of Ephraim, it displeased him, and so he took his father's hand and removed it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. And Joseph said to his father, 'Not so, my father, for this one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head.' But his father refused and said, 'I know, my son, I know. He shall also become a people, and he shall also be great, but truly his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his descendants shall become a multitude of nations.' So he blessed them that day, saying, 'By you Israel will bless, saying, may God make you as Ephraim and Manasseh.' And thus he set Ephraim before Manasseh." So when we get into the tribes coming into the promised land, Judah becomes the dominant tribe in the south. And Ephraim becomes the dominant tribe in the 10 northern tribes. And collectively, the 10 northern tribes are referred to as either Israel or Ephraim, depending on the book you happen to be in. And we're not really told why Gideon didn't call the tribe of Ephraim to come and help, but it's probably because God had not directed Gideon to call him. But in the last chapter, he brings them in. And they're the ones that actually capture two of the Midianite princes. So, Rob, go ahead and show that one map, the Ishmaelite tribe map. Okay, so I wanted you guys to kind of see, this is the land of see Israel up there. Edom is below. If you remember, Edom is the descendants of Esau. Okay, so they're not Jews, but they're related. And the kingdom of Edom was always at odds with Israel. And below that, so you see Egypt over there on the far left-hand side, and this whole section down on the east side of the Red Sea is the land of Midian. So that is where these people that are plaguing the children of Israel are coming from. And right at the south of Israel, there's a great big range of mountains, and they basically go right up until the Sea of Galilee there. And so if the Midianites were going to attack, they were going to come in from the east and cross over the Jordan to come and attack. That's significant because of the tribes that are on the east side of the Jordan, and we'll kind of get to that in a little bit. But I kind of wanted to give you the idea of at least where everybody kind of is in relation to Israel. So, Judges back in Judges 7:25, it says, "And they captured the two princes of the Midianites, Oreb and Zeb. And they killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb, and Zeb they killed at the winepress of Zeb. They pursued Midian and brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon on the other side of the Jordan." So before we start again, I want to remind you that everything recorded in the Bible, just like I said, was not necessarily something God approved of. And not every man of God did everything right. And the Bible is full of men that started well and then later made mistakes. And that's why as we read it, we need to identify the things that God commanded and the times that they were obedient and point out the times that they blew it. And, this is one of the coolest things about Scripture is that if this was all about people doing everything right, you would never hear about the bonehead plays that these guys make. But the Bible calls balls and strikes every single time. So None of the Bible heroes are infallible. They're all just men and women like any one of us. And that makes them a lot more relatable, I believe, because, we all have the ability to blow it, to fall, to get complacent, to, get tired, to get irritated, anything just like these guys did. So we'll kind of pick it up in chapter 8 here, and we see this minor confrontation between Gideon and the tribe of Ephraim. So verse 1 says, "Now the men of Ephraim said to him, why have you done this to us by not calling us when you went to fight with the Midianites?" And they reprimanded him sharply. So again, we can kind of speculate about these guys. These guys were known as very fierce warriors. And again, they were the dominant tribe in the northern kingdom. And these guys have participated in at least the other two major conflicts with the judges in Ehud's back in chapter 30 and Barak and Deborah back in chapter 5. The tribe of Ephraim was very involved in each one of those battles. So why were they not called to help? And there's a tradition that the tribes of Manasseh and Ephraim didn't get along very well. It's that brotherly rivalry, and again, you have this younger that got the blessing that the older should have had. That doesn't really breed good feelings towards each other when, you got something I was supposed to have. And though we're several hundred years from that event, this kind of prejudice has kind of been passed down. So they work together, but there's just kind of an edge there. One of the other reasons is, there would be spoils of war. There was 120,000 dead Midianite soldiers on the battlefield. And so there's a lot of spoil to be gathered from that. And if the Ephraimites were not invited to the battle, they would not get to share in the spoils of the battle. Verses 2 through 3 says, "And he said to them, what have I done now in comparison with you? Is not the gleanings of the grapes of Ephraim better than the vintage of Abizar? God has delivered into your hands the princes of Midian, Oreb and Zeb. And what was I able to do in comparison with you?" Then their anger towards him subsided when he said that. So there's a couple things here worth noting. First of all, you're never going to be able to satisfy every person. Everybody has expectations of you. And, it's funny, I was actually I was trying to give a good example of this, and I went and looked at a Yelp review of Chick-fil-A. Because, we're all in pretty much agreement. That's a pretty rockin' place. Got really good food and stuff like that. And the reviews are all over the place. Well, if you happen to be part of the Alphabet Mafia, you're going to rate them at 1 star, right? You're never going to please everybody. Even though they have good food, they have good service, nice people, you're never going to find a 5 out of 5 rating for just about anything. People are always going to figure out a way to complain about something that you do. Let's take church, for example, and this is just an academic study. This doesn't mean this is happening here or anything, but it's especially pronounced in churches a lot of times. Like some people prefer churches that chairs to pews, pews to chairs. Somebody has a preference. Organs to guitars. Dress up to dress down, casual. Even though Dale doesn't wear shorts, I'll wear shorts. That's fine. I've got nice legs. Modern worship versus traditional worship. In a church building or in a strip mall. People have their bents, things that they like, and you can add just about anything else to that list. No matter who you are, you have an opinion about something that the church is doing, and you may not like everything the church does. It may not be enough to leave the church or say something, but it's enough to cross your arms and kind of get all prune-faced and grouchy when it happens. We all have our preferences. I have one suit. It's good for Marion and it's good for burying. Okay? That's it. And, every time I have to wear it for something like that, I get very uncomfortable. And that's just a me thing. If there's a formal event, I will wear it because I care more about the person that we are serving than I do about how comfortable I am with it. So that's one of those things that, I figure is more important. My second year here, I was invited to share at a community Thanksgiving event in the auditorium over at the high school. And so I put a little talk together talking about Christmas and gifts and tied that into, salvation being a gift and everything like that. I had everything ready, and, it's November. It's cold outside, right? And so I show up. There's a couple hundred people there. So I show up in a flannel shirt and jeans and boots, and I'm dressed and comfortable. How I feel, I feel comfortable. And at the last minute, I'm told by was Pastor Hubert, who was kind of running the thing, is, oh, by the way, the pastor of the Spanish church is going to come up there and he's going to interpret for you. And I'm like, oh, okay. I've never done that before, and that takes something. That's something that's really kind of different to do, because you have to, basically just cut little phrases and then look at him and he looks at you, and it's anyway. So I'm up on stage in my comfortable clothes that I would normally wear, even on a Sunday morning, and he walks up and he has got the shiniest silver suit. It looks like, you ever see shark skin? It's like it kind of changes colors a little bit depending on the angle of the light that's hitting it. And I'm just like, man, that is a nice suit. That is sharp. And he's like, thank you. All right, just keep going. I'm like, no, that's really nice. I really like that, And so you had the two of us up on stage, two polar opposites of each other. And he's trying to make sense in Spanish what I'm saying in English. It was really kind of weird. But it's you could definitely tell, which one of us was comfortable in what we brought. He was comfortable in what he was wearing. I was comfortable in what I was wearing, and we were both made uncomfortable by standing close to each other. But his church was much more formal than ours would, and I would probably be way less comfortable there if I had to wear my one suit every Sunday. Many things that, churches fight about and even split over are insignificant personal preferences. Very less often about doctrinal issues, more about preference. There was a lady my parents told me about that, when in the church that they went to, she didn't approve of the new carpet that was put in the sanctuary. So every Sunday, she would show up with a remnant of the old carpet. And when she sat down, she would put that under her feet and stand on it and sit on it. And I'm just like, it's hard to imagine somebody would do that, right? And nobody in any other place, no school, no job, no place, would anybody do that but church. Somebody would do that in church. It's just the weirdest thing. So these guys, the people of Ephraim were slaves under Midian, just like everybody else. And they had to know about the 135,000 men that were amassing and camping near their border. So they wait until the battle is won, and then they voice their displeasure. And it looks like the conflict that's talking about here in the first three verses actually happened at the end of this event. So it didn't happen like right afterwards, because you have a bunch of stuff that has to take place in sequence. And so it's kind of out of place. This is what happened, and it's pretty similar to most of the ways that you see Eastern storytelling, where they basically, will tell a circle in stories and then add more details as they come back around. So this is after Gideon comes back, after his thing is all done, and he has captured the two kings. This is when this event actually happens. But Gideon actually, when he is talking to these guys, he uses a a strategy that I wish that everybody would employ. And he talks about it in Proverbs 15:1. A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Now, Gideon could have very easily gone, you know what, you're just lucky that you got the call. But that's not what he says. These guys were very proud people, and Gideon, called them up. And if they had called them up at the very beginning of this whole thing, you have all these men of Ephraim that are intermixed with all the other groups, and they said, okay, all you that are afraid, go home. How would that have messed up the whole plan that God had for thinning out the herd? Or how would they have handled it? Like, well, you drank water wrong, so you get to go home too. These people were very proud, and they're warriors, and it was a very good thing that they were not in the mix when God was thinning the herd there. And on top of that, these were the ones that got Oreb and Zeb, who were the Midianite princes. And Gideon makes this diplomatic statement that kind of took the edge away. So he was a peacemaker. And if you look at basically what he's saying in verse 2 there, I'll read it again. It says, so I said to them, what have I done now in comparison with you? Is not the gleanings of the grapes of Ephraim better than the vintage of Abizar? What he's saying is that you guys have the best of everything. The stuff that, my family stuff, the stuff that hits the ground and you guys don't even pick up is better than the best that my family has. It says, you guys are so much better than us anyway. And by the way, since God delivered these guys into your hands anyway, so you have all this honor for destroying this, and so he was able to kind of smooth things over. I guess you could look at it as sucking up a little bit, but he didn't let his pride get in the way. He made peace because that was more important than defending a supposed slight of his own honor. So. So after all the other tribes are called into action, where you have the 300 that he has, are going to pursue the remnant of this army. So verses 4 and 5 says, when Gideon came to the Jordan, he and the 300 men who were with him crossed over, exhausted but still in pursuit. And he said to the men of Succoth, please give loaves of bread to the people who follow me, for they are exhausted, and I am pursuing Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian. So again, Gideon still has his 300 with him, and they're in pursuit of these guys. And he knows that if they capture and kill them, then you basically cut the feet out from underneath the army. As you've taken out the kings, everybody is going to fold after that. And we look at the divisions of the tribes. Before the east of the Jordan and the tribes that are on the west. Go ahead and throw that other one up, the map of Gideon. Okay. So, what we see here is the Jordan River goes right through there. You have the tribe of Ephraim over here, and Manasseh was actually split into two different spots. They had a piece on each side of the river, and then you have the tribe of Gad down there below Manasseh. So like I said, the tribes on the east side of the Jordan were the first ones to fall when the Midianites come, because they're going around that mountainous region and they're coming in from the east to battle across the Jordan River. And so you can see right that first little. I forgot my laser pointer. The little town Succoth right there, right just on the border of Manasseh and Gad there. That's the first stop that they make. That's where Gideon is addressing these people. And so Gideon lays out this request and his justification for it. We're pursuing these guys. My guys are exhausted. Would you please help us out here? And verse 6, it says, and the leaders of Succoth said, are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna now in your hand, that we should give bread to your army? Now, if you understand what he's saying there, he's saying that, Proof's in the pudding. You don't have the pudding. You don't have the proof. You say you're going after these guys, but these guys are a big deal. And, if you fail and they find out that we helped you, what does that do for us? So that was probably unexpected from these folks, at least in Gideon's eyes, because they were so close to his own tribe on that side of the river. They're not wanting to take sides in this conflict. And the conflict involves them. And, you're going to say that after these if you don't catch these kings and we help you, they're going to come, it's going to be really bad for us. So they turned Gideon down, probably out of, fear and self-preservation. But they were totally disloyal to the greater cause here. One of the issues that the children of Israel had, these tribes, all throughout their history, were, they basically were at times at war with each other. They forget that they're all brothers, and they will go to war with each other. It's very discouraging to pour yourself into something that God has appointed to you, something that really matters and something that requires you to take a huge risk, only to be treated with contempt or apathy by the people that profess to be on your side. And this kind of disloyalty cuts really, really deep. And Gideon, when he hears this, he does not necessarily respond very well. And he's not going to forget this. So verses 7 through 9, it says, "So Gideon said, 'For this cause, when the Lord has delivered Zebah and Zalmunna into my hand, then I will tear your flesh with the thorns from the wilderness and with its briars.' Then he went up from there to Peniel and spoke to them in the same way, and the men of Peniel answered him as the men of Succoth had answered. So he also spoke to the men of Peniel, saying, 'When I come back in peace, I will tear down this tower.'" So Gideon's getting frustrated, okay? He's trying to do what he believed God has called him to do. He's chasing down these kings, and he is not getting any support from his own countrymen. And so he threatens these people to beat him with thorn bushes, and then he comes to the next city a few miles east of there, and he gets the same reaction and a different punishment for these guys because he's going to destroy a tower that they have built there. During this era, the towers were used to allow people to see an enemy approaching, have a higher position for observation. It was a defensive position. Gideon's implication here is that Israel will be at peace soon as Midian is defeated, but you guys, because you're not going to help, you're going to be left undefended and unguarded. I'm going to take down your tower. You notice there's kind of a slight change in Gideon's approach. This is the same guy who just a few days later, you remember this in Judges 6:15, he says, "So he said to him, 'O my Lord, how can I save Israel? Indeed, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house.'" So in 6:15, super humble guy. Whether he's humble because he just doesn't want to do it or what, but we see as God is showing him what he's going to do for him, Gideon seems to be very timid and humble. And just a few days later, he's like whipping people with thorn bushes and wanting to rip down towers and stuff like that because people refuse to help him. You see, there's a change in the guy. It would seem that this guy who is at least in his own house has gained a lot of confidence in the last few days. And I think it's important to point out that we can assume that God gave Gideon the battle plan, the initial one to take on the 135,000. But again, we really don't see Gideon consulting God for anything else after that. Gideon seems to be, just, this is my plan, this is what we're going to do. And he doesn't ask God, what should I do with these people who are not helping me? He just kind of comes up with a plan. So verses 10 through 12 says, "Now Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor, and their armies were with them, about 15,000 in all, who were left of all the army of the people of the east. 120,000 men who drew the sword had fallen. And then Gideon went up by the road of those who dwell in tents on the east side of Nobath and of Jogabah, and he attacked the army while the camp felt secure. When Zebah and Zalmunna fled, he pursued them and took the two kings of Midian, Zebah and Zalmunna, and routed the whole army. So we've gone from 135,000 to 15,000 Midianites. And Gideon still only has 300 guys. And this verse kind of gives insight into how Gideon and his men were able to kind of flank the Midianites and catch them by surprise. The Midianites felt secure as they rested in the camp, and they're concentrating on looking for a pursuing enemy. So as they're retreating and camping out, they're looking to see the guys that are coming after them. And what Gideon does is he flanks them, goes around, and attacks them from what would be the front. So they're totally unprepared from the direction. They're prepared to defend against a pursuing army, but someone who attacks them from from where the direction that they're actually heading is not something they were prepared for. And again, it just says there's all kinds of people that are like, well, maybe maybe God did something and they were confused again. Totally possible. Totally possible. Maybe, these guys were just that good. Again, totally possible. We're not really told. All we are told is that Gideon had 300 guys, and then he took out another 15,000. So we have this Zebah and Zalmunna, the two Midianite kings. They run for their lives, but Gideon captures them both. The Lord had delivered them into his hand, just as he promised back in chapter 6. So verses 13 through 17 says, Then Gideon the son of Joash returned from battle from the ascent of Heres, and he caught a young man of the men of Sokoth and interrogated him. And he wrote down for him the leaders of Sokoth and its elders, 77 men. Then he came to the men of Sokoth, saying, Here is Zebah and Zalmunna, about whom you ridiculed me, saying, Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna now in your hand, that we should give you bread to your weary men? And he took the elders of the city and thorns from the wilderness and briars, and with them he taught the men of Sokoth. Then he tore down the tower of Peniel and killed the men of the city. I think it's kind of interesting that Gideon specifically wanted the names of the men that were leaders here, so he could direct the punishment towards the guys who had sided with the enemy and decided not to resupply them. And it's not a choice that they could ever undo. They had the opportunity to supply Gideon and to be on his side, and there's no coming back from that. Now, it didn't say that he killed all the men of the city, and since he sought out the leaders of one city, it would seem logical that he would do the same in the second, but their punishment was much more severe. They didn't just get whipped with thorns. He took these guys out. And we're not really told why one group deserved flogging and one group deserved death. But we just kind of have to assume that, the situations were different in some way. And that, this is not necessarily something that God commanded Gideon to do. So verses 18 through 19 says, And he said to Zebah and Zalmunna, What kind of men were they who you killed at Tabor? So they answered, As you are, so were they, each one resembling the son of a king. And then he said, They were my brothers, the sons of my mother. As the Lord lives, if you had let them live, I would not kill you. We don't have any background on this incident at Mount Tabor. We don't know if the men that were killed were actually his brothers or if he's just kind of speaking figuratively because they were all part of the same tribe. But the answer that the two kings give is kind of interesting. And I would be willing to bet that these are actually family members of Gideon because he goes on to describe their relationship, specifically the sons of his mother. And they describe the men that they killed as being like Gideon, resembling the son of a king. And I think this remark is meant to actually compliment Gideon and hopefully get on his good side. Say, well, it's just like you, the son of a king, because you look like the son of a king. It would kind of imply respect for not only for Gideon, but for the men who died. And whether the two Midianite kings actually recalled this incident, it's not really clear. What's certain is they have no idea the ironic truth of their own words here. The dead men, we know, were probably actually related to Gideon here. And Gideon says to this pair, if you had not killed his brothers, he wouldn't kill them now. And he swears that this is true as the Lord lives. Again, kind of an interesting statement because Gideon set out to kill these guys from the get-go. But now he's saying, as the Lord lives, I would not kill you if you had not done this. And, he specifically uses the name of Yahweh when he does this. Now, it could be because, this is a kind of a declaration that Gideon's motive for killing these guys would be partially his own vengeance, but also the fulfillment of the duty of the avenger of blood. And that's basically a law that if the killing was an accident, then the accused could run to a city of refuge. And if it was an accident, he could stay there and be protected from any relatives that wanted to come and seek vengeance. But if it was not an accident, we see what it says here in Deuteronomy 19, 11 through 13. But if out of the hate someone lies in wait, assaults and kills a neighbor, then flees to one of these cities, the killer shall be sent for by the town elders and brought back from the city to be handed over to the avenger of blood to die. Show no pity. You must purge from Israel the guilt of shedding of innocent blood, so that it may go well with you. So again, as we get further and further into Gideon's life after the big victory, more of the things that he does are kind of suspect. So verse 20 says, and he said to Jether, his firstborn, rise and kill them. But the youth would not draw his sword, for he was afraid because he was still a youth. Now, this is again, I told you guys in the beginning, this is just kind of a weird chapter to go through. It's just basic history, okay? We're talking about what happened here, and not, there's definitely some application, but you got to dig deep for it. So application, don't have your son try and kill people, they're not ready for it. Gideon may have believed that he was giving his son the honor of avenging his uncles. And probably also he meant to shame these two kings by letting a boy end their life. Because a child that would kill a king would be the ultimate in humiliation, apparently. Because, how you die is really important to your legacy and your reputation. Again, not that they would know any better, but apparently that was a big deal. And you see that a couple different times, in Scripture. We're going to see that actually in the next chapter. But we saw that also with Saul, so anyway, you would bring honor to the men who killed the king, dishonor to the kings that were killed. So it could be that Gideon was trying to build up his son as well. So verse 21 says, so Zebah and Zalmunna said, rise yourself and kill us, for as a man is, so is his strength. So Gideon arose and killed Zebah and Zalmunna, and took the crescent ornaments that were on their camels' necks. So Gideon does the deed himself. I cannot tell, you can't really tell in the way it's written here if this is a slam on Gideon or a request for him to do it because they were afraid of his son would mess it up and maybe prolong their death. Maybe he's about as good at swinging a sword as Peter was, taking off one ear at a time, or something like that. But it's really interesting. The NLT it kind of makes it clear. I love the way that this reads here. The NLT reads this way. It says, then Zebah and Zalmunna said to Gideon, be a man, kill us yourself. So Gideon killed them both and took the royal ornaments from the necks of their camels. Be a man, Gideon. I like that. The crescents he removed from the camels were very likely representations of the gods that they worshiped, because lots of these cultures, these Bedouin societies, would worship the moon god, and the crescent would represent that. Interestingly enough, still does today in certain religions. So verses 22 and 23 says, and the men of Israel said to Gideon, rule over us, both you and your sons, and your grandsons also, for you have delivered us from the hand of Midian. But Gideon said to them, I will not rule over you, nor shall my son rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you. And this is like the last awesome thing that Gideon does. Israel was supposed to be a theocracy. It was always supposed to be ruled that way. God ruling the nation, not a man. You know, the desire for a human king over Israel started very early in the nation's history. And, hundreds of years later, in the days of Samuel the prophet and judge, God gives Israel the king that they've finally been asking for. And they would regret it big time. So Gideon refused. And again, you have to respect that because, if these guys wanted to make him king, he could well, who am I to argue with the will of the people? And he did. He argued with the will of the people. He says, God's going to be king over you. Gideon understood the mission, that he was to deliver them, judge them, but that was all. So 24 to 26 says, Then Gideon said to them, I would like to make a request of you that each of you would give me an earring from his plunder. For they had golden earrings because they were Ishmaelites. So they answered, We would gladly give them. And they spread out a garment, and each man threw into it the earring from his plunder. Now the weight of the gold of the earrings that were requested were 1,700 shekels of gold, besides the crescent ornaments, pendants, and purple robes which were on the kings of Midian, besides the chains that were around their camels' necks. So I didn't, that's not too much to ask for. I just an earring from each one of you guys, it's like as kind of a tribute. And it's a way you can say thanks for all I've done for you. Well, that adds up to, if we're looking at the comparatives, about 43 pounds of gold with all these earrings and everything else. And, a workman is worthy of his wages, according to Matthew chapter 10, but it seems a little overboard here. And it's going to cause a lot of issues for Gideon in the future. So verses 27 and 28 says, And Gideon made it into an ephod and set it up in his city, Orpha. And all of Israel played the harlot with it there. It became a snare to Gideon and to his house. Thus Midian was subdued before the children of Israel, so that they lifted their heads no more, and the country was quiet for 40 years in the days of Gideon. Now an ephod is kind of like a shirt, or I guess it would, what are those things? It's kind of more, I guess more like a vest, like a guy who's directing traffic would wear. So you just kind of put it over top of your clothing. And, for Israel, it was something that the priests wore. And it had a lot of significance for Israel. On the front of it was, basically a linen breastplate, and it had 2 stones in it. And the high priest would use these 2 stones to discern the will of God. They were called the Urim and the Thummim. And in the course of time, this ephod became a symbol of the office of the high priest. The Urim and the Thummim were basically just a black stone and a white stone, and so you could only ask God yes or no questions, basically. And they would reach in and they would pull it out and okay, God says yes. I know that sounds weird, and I know that sounds like, well, what if you're wrong? What if you grab the wrong one? It's like, hey, it worked, okay? And this is how God communicated with people. God is totally capable of doing that, although it seems, like something that kids would do today, is exactly what God told them to do at the time. So the high priest would put this ephod on when he wanted to know what the will of God was for the nation. And remember, there's a rivalry here between Ephraim and Manasseh. At this particular time, the tabernacle was currently in the city of Shiloh. And can you guess what tribe housed the city of Shiloh? It was Ephraim, not Manasseh, the tribe of... So, we have this rivalry here with Gideon and his tribe. Well, I'm going to have an ephod in my tribe too. So it's possible that the ephod there was, basically as a response to that. And if he made it as a memorial to God's victory over the Midianites, then I guess that's one thing, but it became an object later on of pagan worship and idolatry. So not a good move for Gideon. Verse 29 through 32 says, And then Jerubbaal, the son of Joash, went and dwelt in his own house. Gideon had 70 sons who were of his own offspring, for he had many wives, and his concubine, who was in Shechem, also bore him a son whose name was Abimelech. Now Gideon, the son of Joash, died at a good old age and was buried in the tomb of Joash his father in Orpha of the Aberzites. I guess that's where that is. And this name, Jerubbaal, was another name that Gideon was given, one that he earned when he tore down the altar of Baal in his father's house back in chapter 6. And Gideon didn't want to be king, but that didn't stop him from living like one. Having a harem was one way that you could proudly, show everybody how wealthy you were. Look at all these people in my house. Look at all these wives that I have and these children that require resources to support. So he was basically flaunting his wealth. And we get this foreshadowing here, the next guy, Abimelech, Gideon's son from this concubine. The name Abimelech was given to him by Gideon. The name Abimelech means my father, a king. So while Gideon refused to be a king, he acted like a king, and he named his kid like he was a king. That's going to come back to again, haunt the nation of Israel. So 33 through 35 says, so it was, as soon as Gideon was dead, that the children of Israel again played the harlot with the Baals and made Baal Berith their god. Thus the children of Israel did not remember the Lord their God, who had delivered them from the hands of all their enemies on every side, nor did they show kindness to the house of Jerubbaal, in accordance with the good that he had done for Israel. The story of Gideon is a cautionary tale. We all want to finish well. That's our goal. And as you look at Gideon, it doesn't sound like he ended very well. He definitely had some issues going on in his life. 1 Corinthians 9:24 through 27 says, do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but one receives the prize? Run in such a way that you may obtain it, that everyone who competes for this prize is temperate in all things. Now they do it to obtain a perishable crown, but we for an imperishable crown. Therefore I run thus, not with uncertainty, thus I fight, not as one who beats the air, but I discipline my body and bring it into subjugation, lest when I have preached to others, I myself should become disqualified. This race that Paul is talking about in 1 Corinthians is something that we're all in ourselves. Every single one of us has our own race to run. And here at the end of chapter 8, we find ourselves right back where we started in chapter 6, where the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, so the Lord delivered them to the hands of Midian for 7 years. But instead of being judged by another nation, they're now going to be subject to a man who would make himself their king, and that would be Gideon's son Abimelech. And we'll talk about him next time. He's a real peach. So let's go ahead and pray, and we'll finish up. Lord, we thank you for this. We thank you for the example of Gideon's life. Lord, I thank you that you don't whitewash the mistakes that your servants make. Lord, that if you want to use his life as a cautionary tale to us, then we need to see it that way. Lord, we just pray that as we're talking about running our own race, Lord, that you would just be giving us the stamina to do it. And Lord, just as you guide us in the way that you want us to go, Lord, I pray that you would just continue to give us the strength to walk for you, to speak for you, to accomplish anything that you set before us. Lord, I pray that you just be watching over these guys as they leave here tonight, and that you would be just blessing their week. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.